Chris Martin. Here we are again in the Martin Museum. Today I want to talk about the D-35. The D-35 was created in 1965, and this in fact is its 50th birthday. I was 10 years old in 1965, and I got my first Martin guitar when I was 10. It's a little 518. It's actually on display in my room here in the museum. In anticipation of this momentous occasion of really the younger sibling of, if you think about the D-28, the D-18, and the D-35, the D-35 is the youngest at age 50. I did some research because I was curious, not really remembering what was going on in the world when I was 10, and a lot of things were going on in the world. It was an inflection point in terms of music and politics. Folk music, of course. The company was on a roll. We had just moved into the new factory to catch up with the demand from the folk boom, and folk music and rock and roll collided. And the D-35 was born at that moment. Politically, there was a lot going on in terms of how do we treat each other as Americans, and as Americans, how are we perceived around the world? 1965 was the first year we sent real, legitimate troops to Vietnam. Prior to that, they were advisors and special forces. 1965 was the year that Malcolm X died. There were the riots in Watts, so there was a lot of ferment. 1965 was the year that Bob Dylan went electric. But if you look back at that point, you can see how critical and important folk music was to the change that was sweeping across America, the beginning, really the beginning of the age of Aquarius. And the Martin guitar was right there. The origins of the D-35 were very practical. We were running out of Brazilian rosewood, which we had used for many, many, many years. And we were beginning to hear that the supply was dwindling and was probably more than likely going to be cut off, which in fact it was a couple years later. Someone, we don't know who, several people have actually claimed that they were the ones who invented the D-35, but it's not really documented, so let's just leave that to historical speculation. But the idea was that we recognized that some of the Brazilian rosewood pieces, now there was rectangular, about this big, so there's two of them, open them up in a book match, you can make a D-28. Some of those pieces had defect or degrade around the edges. And so we put them aside because they were really valuable, but we didn't know what to do with them. And someone said, hey, you know, if you took 3 of those pieces, now one would be odd because it wouldn't be part of the book match, and you reconfigured them, you could get rid of the degrade, you could make a back out of 3 pieces, and how about a new model? Now this was a time when we didn't introduce new models very often, so this was a pretty important decision. There was a concern about it not just being perceived as a D-28 with a 3-piece back, so we made some cosmetic changes which upgraded the guitar, made it look a little fancier, and we wanted to differentiate it tonally. So a couple prototypes were made, and the prototype that they settled on had a bound fingerboard, a little more detail in the body binding, and most importantly, it had the bracing from a tripolo. So the top bracing is a little smaller, a little more delicate, and that differentiated the sound enough between that and, of course, the 3-piece back. And then we recognized that we had an opportunity to not just be very judicious about using these resources, but we could create a pretty compelling look by deciding, and it really was up to the whim of the person that matched the backs and sides, whether or not the inner wedge or the outer wings would contrast with or match with the sides of the guitar. And that really set it off, I think, in terms of its aesthetics. Now, we are certainly not the first company to make 3-piece back guitars. In fact, many, many years ago, it was very difficult to get big pieces of wood, and guitars were made out of multiple pieces on the backs. But I think it's pretty safe to say that we've sold more 3-piece back guitars than any other guitar builder on earth ever. And in fact, behind me, we've got a bunch of 3-piece back limited edition models that are on display. This one is an original. This is from 1967. We brought it back for our collection. To help celebrate the anniversary, we wanted to have an original here. You know, we never kept much back in the day for the museum. It was all cash flow. So we went out and bought this in the marketplace. We took this to the trade show last month and had it prominently on display as we were going about celebrating the D-35 with a limited edition and also commemorating on every standard production D-35 we make this year with a paper label and a laser-etched block and also a little booklet that I'll show you in a second. So what else happened in 1965? The Whammo Super Ball came on the market. 1965 was the first year that historians will say that the skateboard was recognized as a thing. And Porsche came out with two new models, the 912, which was kind of a continuation of the 356 in a 911 body, and a car that I think is very cool, and I actually owned one in the 1990s, the 911 Targa. And this is, in fact, also the 50th anniversary of the 911 Targa Porsche, so I think the D-35 is in pretty good company there. So what have we done to celebrate? We have a model that incorporates some Brazilian rosewood in it, and this is limited to 100. They were all sold at the trade show to our dealers. If you're interested in one, you can get in touch with the company and we can tell you who in fact bought one of these. They'll be coming off the production line throughout the year. And then, as I mentioned, all the D-35s we make this year will have a paper label. And I think this is really cool. We're able today with our laser to laser etch the block. And you know, paper labels can come and go, but this is a permanent part of the guitar in perpetuity. And there's just, you know, no one's going to take that off. And then if you buy either one of the guitars, you get a little booklet, talks about the history of the D-35 and the model that you'll be buying.
So discussions about the D-35 started around 1963 and 1964, really in an attempt to use up rosewood from two-piece backs from the D-28, which had started to accumulate with small defects. And this was really an efficiency thing. In 1964, a prototype was made called the X-35. The X-35 incorporated the three-piece back. The result of that first prototype was a guitar, because of the unique dynamics of the three-piece back and the bracing, a guitar that had a tremendously warm, thick bass response, actually a little bit too much bass response. So a series of 6 more prototypes were made called A, B, and C, utilizing different bracing patterns, combining thinner bracing with the D-28 bracing, some combining thinner top bracing with triple O or double O back bracing. And the C prototypes actually had the thinnest bracing, 1/4 inch thick top bracing combined with double O size back bracing, which were quite thin. The result was a better tone response, more balanced, but still quite a lot of strong bass response, perhaps stronger than the D-28. Combined with specifications that were considered an upgrade from the D-28, which included the bound fingerboard, a little bit of extra inlay around the side of the guitar, plus the really striking beauty of the three-piece back. The D-35 emerged as a very, very popular model. In fact, surpassing the D-18 and the D-28 in sales pretty quickly, and remaining so up through 2005 when we last recorded the totals. The thing about the D-35 is it has a tremendous response for vocal accompaniment. The bass response lends itself to recording studio use and stage use, and really goes well with vocals. And for that reason, artists like Johnny Cash, Bruce Springsteen, Elvis Presley, and many, many others use the D-35 on stage for that purpose. This is our 50th anniversary of the D-35, and we're happy to celebrate it with an array of models that incorporate the three-piece back. Beautiful, beautiful guitar.
It's a really cool guitar. I am so proud of the company and this is really my father's generation, that they were able to create, it's basically, what's that old saying? We took a sow's ear some Brazilian rosewood that was defective around the edges and made a silk purse out of it. And we've been very, very successful with it, and it's still a significant and important part of the Martin lineup today.